our chairperson for the session, Dr. Tlhagane. Are you audible?
Yes, Comrade Zanel, I'm here.
All right, the session is live. You can continue.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, comrades. Welcome to our Session for Africa Day. Without much further ado, I'd wish to just introduce some of our speakers for today. I believe we have Comrade Mike, who's the COSATU First Deputy President. Then following that, we'll have Mr. Alvin, Comrade Alvin, who's the NEC member and South Africa's Deputy Minister for International Relations. I believe we also have a speaker, Comrade Fourie from SACP. And the next speaker will be Professor Esack. Prof is for Africa for Palestine and comes from Johannesburg Institute of Advanced Studies. And last but definitely not least is Comrade Zahid Rajan, who's Kenya for Palestine. So without further ado, may I please ask Comrade Mike to please give us our introduction and carry on.
Thank you very much, Comrade Program Director. I am unfortunately, as I said, trying to get my camera on, so my apology for now. But let me, on behalf of the National Office Bearers of COSATU, the Central Executive Committee, and the members of the Federation, welcome all the participants on this important day of the Africa Day. I must greet also Professor Farid from Africa for Palestine, Professor Kaunda, Comrade Fourie, Comrade Botes, and all participants here. As COSATU, today we joined millions of Africans on the continent and in the diaspora as we commemorate the 58th anniversary of Africa Day, which is our common heritage and a space for reflection on the present and the future of our beloved continent. The celebration of Africa Month and Africa Day provides an opportunity to promote African unity, deeper regional integration, and recommit ourselves to a common destiny. This year, we again commemorate Africa Day at a rather difficult time when all the world's attention is focused on fighting against the COVID-19 and also on the securing equitable access to safe and effective vaccines. During this unusual period, however, we have seen how the unification of the African continent has remained crucial to achieving sustainable development and the overarching objectives of the Africa or the Agenda 2063. As we reflect on the road we have traveled and the actions required to reach the objectives we have identified for ourselves as a continent, it is important to also introspect on our role in offering or waging solidarity with people in situations of distress inside and outside of Africa. We have to call upon ourselves to organize and coordinate our solidarity efforts as Africans to add weight and voice to the millions of voices that are upheld by the current situation in Western Sahara, for example. As COSATU, we continue to urge the AU to withdraw the decision to readmit Morocco into the EU. With the continued systematic human rights abuses, the police brutality, the violations of international laws and fundamental rights, the Saharan people of Africa's last colony, Western Sahara, continue to endure repression at the hands of the Moroccan occupying forces. African countries should put maximum effort towards the liberation of the Western Sahara to realize the goals and the aspirants of the founding fathers of the Organization of African Union. As we celebrate Africa Day, we celebrate the liberation of the continent. And the commitment was that Africa's independence will not be complete unless and until all African countries were free from colonial rule. And this objective has not been fully achieved because we still have Western Sahara, which is still under colonial occupation. And the irony of this colonial occupation is by another African country, something which was never imagined in the heyday of the African liberation struggle. There is no doubt, comrades, that the AU remains one of the strongest regional blocs in the world in condemning Israel's atrocities against the Palestinian people. The African Union has consistently expressed solidarity with the Palestinian people, including by calling for the immediate lifting of Israel's blockade on Gaza, urging member states to ban settlement products, and strongly condemning Israel's aggressive land grab policies and illegal settlements. As our icon of the liberation struggle in South Africa, Nelson Mandela, once said, that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of Palestinians. But there is a blunt discontent, comrades, that we must point out between the AU's declaration and the actions of its member states. For instance, in January, the African Union adopted a declaration rejecting the December 2017 recognition of Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel by the United States. Yet, several African states attended the US Embassy inauguration in Jerusalem on the 14th of May, including Angola, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, DRC, Congo, Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, Rwanda, Zambia, and Tanzania. The very same day which this inauguration was taking place was the day that dozens of Palestinians were being killed and thousands injured during the protest in Gaza. As a continent, we must be bold in naming and shaming those states that turn their backs on the AU declarations concerning the human rights of Palestinians. We must call out those states who intentionally defied the AU and lent support to Israel's illegal annexation of occupied East Jerusalem by attending the inauguration of the US Embassy. The states that declined to openly support the initiation of investigations into the Gaza killings must also be held to account. And their failure to take a stand makes a mockery of the AU stance commitment to support Palestinians in their struggle against institutionalized discrimination. The countries that continue to trade in settlement goods and services in violation of the numerous AU's declaration must also be exposed, and this includes, comrades, our own South African government. In essence, we must do more than pay just lip services to the human rights of Palestinians. The African Union must take concrete action by investigating the conduct of its member states in their cooperation with Israel and assessing their compliance with their international legal obligations. We know very well, comrades, that nothing can undo Razan al-Najjar's death, but African leaders should be guided by her legacy and that of Hector Peterson of standing up against decades of institutionalized discrimination and oppression. And in the past 2 weeks, we have seen the Israel regime embark on continued deadly attacks on Palestinian civilians, bombing residential homes in Gaza. This continuous disregard for the Palestinians' life and murderous spree has left thousands of women, men and children dead and many more injured and homeless. Israel's arrogance and continued genocide is a crime against humanity, and it must be named as such. It is in this regard, comrades and colleagues and the participants, that today's event is convened to highlight the important role the African Progressive Movement in advancing the Palestinian struggle and to make a clear call to action, uniting the African voice in stopping oppression wherever it raises its head. We need to grow this movement in Africa to build on our character of Ubuntu. Collectively, we have a moral responsibility to lead the call and expose Israel. In South Africa, we fought apartheid through receiving solidarity, and today we once more call for further consumer boycott of goods from occupied territories and companies supported or owned by the Zionist regime. The buying of these goods, it continues to fund the murderous spree that Israel is perpetuating against the civilians in Palestine. We want to take this opportunity on the occasion of the 58th anniversary of African Union to pledge to continue to mobilize and support for the Africa movement in solidarity with Palestine, working with the Africa for Palestine and the SABDS campaign. We will not be silenced until the people of Palestine are free and we have realized their rights to self-determination. And with those words, comrades, I say welcome and open. I say long live to the people of Palestine and long live the Africa for Palestinian. Amandla, thank you very much, Comrade Chairperson.
Thank you, Comrade Mike, away too. Those have been some words of wisdom, and thank you for an elaborate and gracious opening. I think due to the fact that we're pressed for time, may I kindly allow perhaps the first three speakers to speak before we allow for questions and answers. Can I ask then Comrade Alvin to please follow and grace us with his words? Comrade Alvin, are you there?
Yes, Chairperson, I am here. It's just that I was just locked in another session, and there's obviously an issue with my just the video here. But let me first bring greetings to the leadership of COSATU, who had a foresight, Chair, to organize this particular session, and I think there must be a deep appreciation actually expressed for that type of a foresight. Chair, and I think let me also acknowledge the president present here. I think, Chair, our entry point, of course, from both the side of the African National Congress and the democratic state is when we look at the struggle of the Palestine people. We look, of course, Chairperson, through the optics of global solidarity and the deepening of South to South solidarity. I think the leave that we take, Chair, as we have celebrated 25 years of our constitutional dispensation this year, is that the Bill of Rights from the South African Constitution and envisage a vision of a society where there's self-determination on rights of choice, there's self-determination in relation to the land question, etc. And what we are interpreting as a democratic state is that type of self-determination that our Bill of Rights in South Africa actually envisage for South African people to be applying also to the plight of the Palestine people. So when we say solidarity based on self-determination, on democratic choice, and on the question of the land, that is a language that finds resonance not only within the realm of the South African constitutional state, but also beyond our borders. So the democratic state, Chair, is obligated to relate to what the Freedom Charter says is that to relate on a world where there is peace and freedom. So when the Freedom Charter in 1955 was crafted, I think the pen holders have contemplated a very difficult world, and they have said, when they crafted the Freedom Charter, they have put certain key conditions to those that would ultimately represent the people at the democratic level. And part of the conditions is that as South African democratic state, we must always err on the side of the most vulnerable. And therefore, the plight of the Palestine people, Chairperson, is we are highly subjective as a democratic state in relation to our own conduct and through the lenses and in how we actually relate with the Palestinian people. We are subjective, Chairperson, because what is characterized as a conflict, it's not a conflict per se. What you are having in Palestine is where you have aggressor that perpetuate aggression against an oppressed people. And I think our inception note from the South African state is that always at the side of the oppressor, always at the side of upholding multilateralism. The laws of occupation, Chairperson, it's deeply rooted in the United Nations Charter. So the charter that founded the UN, including on the 76th occasion of the anniversary of UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly's composition, clearly spelled out that Israel is in conflict with the laws of occupation. So this is not a notion of the South African democratic state. This issue is universally accepted both by UNGA and the United Nations Security Council. Of course, Chair, immediately I must put a disclaimer that why there has not been sanctions put against the state of Israel, it's of course because of the right of privilege as it relates to the veto right. So you are not going to have an immediate proximity of sanctions declared by UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly, up until the time there's a recognition that in particular the United States has a particular role to play. It has an obligation, Chairperson, under this new leadership of President Biden to take a leave from his predecessor, not of course the immediate predecessor. We're speaking about his predecessor in the Democratic Party, former President Obama, which have said that at all times America must subscribe to implementation, for example, of the Oslo Peace Accord. President Biden and the American people cannot continue to take a leave from the Trump administration, Chairperson. And that is what we are saying as a democratic state, that when the Americans are saying they are realizing the centrality of multilateralism, they are realizing the centrality of the United Nations as a primary representative organ of all member states. We are saying that realization and recognition must come to their subjective role, of course, that they have to play in resolving the conflict perpetuated and fueled by the Israeli state against the innocent and vulnerable people of Palestine. But, Chairperson, I thought we must also raise important questions today. And some of the questions, of course, I'm obviously raising it also in the capacity as an NEC member of the ANC. Why is it that during the holy month of Ramadan, the United Nations, the state of Israel suddenly awoken and laid siege to a holy place of worship of the Muslims within Palestine? And I'm saying, Chair, what we must look at a reality that the Prime Minister of Israel has not been one of the immediate people that President Biden of America have called to seek a telephonic bilateral after his elections. The US administration have, for the very first time, accepted the obligation to fund UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee Agency, for the plight of Palestine refugees. They have made that statement that they are going to now unlock their vast resources to continue to fund this agency. They said they are rekindling their relations with the World Health Organization, and they have underpinned and endorsed South Africa's role and India's role as it relates to negation from the vaccine nationalism. The question must be posed, could this attack, could it has been fueled by a realization from the state of Israel that they have to pull the arm of the American administration, given the very early signs of progressiveness that we could actually have interpreted? So that is the one question that I thought for the seminar we must just raise politically for us to be able to dissect it. The second question, Chair, is of course a very important issue. The Palestine people, one of the central criticism raised against the Palestine people is that the leadership of President Abbas can't necessarily proclaim to be the representative of the people as it relates to a democratic dispensation is concerned, given the more than a decade since the last Palestine elections has been held. So what the PLO then have done is to say, look, let me first indicate, I must recognize the role that the leadership in Cairo, in particular the Egyptians, is playing, that have facilitated unity amongst Fatah and Hamas to ensure that there's a central role and clarity as it relates to the elections is concerned. Why is it that just when Palestine was supposed to have held democratic elections, there was this besiegement, an attack by the state of Israel? And I'm raising this question because in multilateral forums, the criticism raised against the Palestine people, no, they are not a democratic state. They have not had elections for the past 10 years. Just on the eve of both your legislative elections, which was supposed to have been convened on the 22nd of May, there is this brutal attack with firepower of F-16, etc. And I'm saying, Chairperson, that we must be able to ask why things happen in the manner that it have done. As I conclude, Chair, lastly, is that as South Africa, we have made a statement that, look, we have been able to, in May 2018, recall our ambassador from the State of Israel. We have reviewed our bilateral relationships with the State of Israel. And we have said, Chairperson, up until there's no forward movement, we put what I can categorize a restraint of trade. So we limit our engagements and a high-level engagements with the State of Israel up until they have agreed to subscribe to the Quartet and to the Oslo Accords type of temperament. And I think that is where we are. In South Africa, we will continue to support, of course, the Palestine embassy, having different characters of that type of a support. And I think what the Palestine people can confirm is that at multilateral level, whether at the UN Human Rights Council, whether at the United Nations General Assembly, we will continue to play a fortified leadership role around the plight of the Palestine people, Chairperson. So I thought that I must conclude at this level just by restating that the language that the President of South Africa and the ANC, President Ramaphosa, have utilized to rebuke the recent attack against the innocent people of Palestine has very deep diplomatic ramifications. It puts South Africa, of course, in the forefront at the international stage to make sure, Chairperson, we are consistent with that type of a mantra and a thematic message that our president actually have foretold. And of course, Chair, we'll continue to use our diplomatic community to ensure ultimately the Middle East peace process becomes a reality in our immediate life. And one of the key variables that we're looking at is for the, for the unraveling of the Abraham's Accord, which sought to isolate the Palestinian people from its immediate Arab neighbors. Chair, on Africa Day, I think when we speak about Pan-Africanism, you speak about a mirror image of what global solidarity have meant for the frontline states and also for the African people's struggle. And global solidarity with a very vulnerable country like Palestine, it's exactly a mirror image of what we do as it relates to the struggles of the Cuban people, the struggles of the people of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and the struggles of the people of Western Sahara. But as I conclude, Chair, siyabulela Nkosi kakhulu for this foresight of this trade union movement called COSATU to have this type of political dialogue. And I think we are deeply elated, Chairperson, that the non-state sector in South Africa are seized with matters as it relates to the plight of the vulnerable people. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Comrade Alvin. And thank you again for your thought-provoking presentation. I think even the South African president rebuked these attacks, I think not recently, on France 24. So I thank you for also resonating with his words. And again, like you said, it's very disdaining when people are being attacked during a time of Holy Month, because I don't think even people be attacked on Christmas Day. But anyway, that's a discussion for another day. Without further ado, may I kindly ask that we move on to the next speaker. Comrade Fourie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to disconnect my camera just to ensure that there's consistency in terms of audibility. Good afternoon, comrades, and warm revolutionary greetings from the South African Communist Party. Choosing Africa Day for this important deliberation is of much significance. The Organization of African Unity was formally founded on the 25th of May, 1963, to better coordinate our struggles against colonialism. So this day reminds us that African humanism, or Ubuntu, driven by the sentiment, I am what I am because of who we all are, necessitates that our freedom and prosperity is intricately linked to the freedom and prosperity of all the oppressed. Oppression and repression constitute the daily lives of the Palestinians. But the tyranny that we witnessed between the 10th and the 21st of May, in particular, it has shocked the world. In just 11 days, the Israeli regime slaughtered 248 Palestinians, including 66 children. They wounded 1,900 and left tens of thousands displaced. The social and economic infrastructural damage inflicted on Gaza, it's estimated to exceed $100 million. As the South African Communist Party, we want to salute all the Palestinians for their selfless, resilient, and united action against the violent extremism of apartheid Israel. We also extend our sincere condolences to the family and the friends of those who had died, as well as to all Palestinians in general. The brave acts of self-defense and resistance has enabled the exposure of the Israeli regime's aggression. The whole world witnessed the horror of their brutality, despite their deliberate efforts to block and counter it. Likewise, the USA's projection of itself as the defender of human rights was also rattled, as their weapons were instrumental in enabling the military adventurism. Israeli forces spokesman Zolberman boldly announced that 80 fighter planes were used in the military operation in Gaza, including the advanced F-35s produced by the USA and secondary partner Italy. Of course, we welcome the outrage that was expressed by the American people and the resolution that was tabled to block the recent $735 million arms deal. We also hear the Biden administration's offer to assist with the rebuilding of Gaza. But a good start would be to reverse the decision to declare Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and to remove the USA embassy from there. Furthermore, the USA should withdraw its troops from West Africa and lift all illegal sanctions that is imposed on this region and elsewhere in the world. In addition, the government of Israel must be held accountable for the war crimes that they committed, particularly because their arrogance is unrelenting. Arrest and harassment of Palestinians are continuing as we speak. The protests in the USA and across the world at large, as well as the persistent calls by many in the United Nations Security Council for an end to the Israeli aggression, those actions were a direct result of the bold activities of the Palestinian people. The SACP were among the many voices that called for increased extensive pressure on the Israeli regime to abandon its apartheid policies on Palestine. And we were physically present at many of the solidarity protests across South Africa and wherever else our members are located. The fundamental strategic shift in the growing international solidarity with the Palestinian struggle is cause for celebration. It is significant as it challenges the Israeli regime's propaganda tentacles, which have dominated every space. Israel's disinformation and charm offensive, as personally driven by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has also found its roots in Africa. As the Netanyahu regime utilizes every means possible to dictate the narrative and to try and turn around the negative perception that it has on our continent. Netanyahu has leveraged the contacts that he has established as a former permanent representative to the United Nations, which includes some African heads of state, to attend regional summits like ECOWAS and for bilateral visits to countries like Rwanda, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Chad, and Mali as the Prime Minister. In addition to using his personal influence, Netanyahu also uses Mossad, which reports directly to his office, to ingratiate apartheid Israel on our continent in the guise of developmental and security cooperation and support. So extensive is the propaganda machinery that a dedicated ministry, the Ministry of Strategic Affairs and Public Diplomacy, has an annual budget that exceeds $30 million just to counter our activities around sanctions and disinvestment. Of course, when persuasion fails, then bribery becomes the preferred diplomatic tool. A case in point was the forcing of countries by the Trump administration to restore relations with Israel as a precondition to lifting of sanctions. Given the amount of effort and money that the Israeli occupying forces put into propaganda, countering it will require that we, as the progressive Palestinian solidarity movement in Africa, have absolute coordination and synchronization of our resources, programs, and messages. Today's webinar contributes significantly to such coordination, and we thank everyone that made it possible. The SACP stands in unconditional solidarity with the people of Palestine in the resilient fight against tyranny of the Israeli apartheid regime. We support today's efforts and all other efforts across the world aimed at strengthening international solidarity, as well as advancing sustained activities in support of the oppressed Palestinian people. As we gather on this day, the 25th of May, 2021, Africa Day, we honor all of those who were martyred in this just call for a free Palestine. We vow to support an end to the prolonged occupation by always exposing the activities of apartheid Israel and its allies here in the Middle East. And like our forebears who founded the Organization of African Unity, now rebirthed as the African Union, we affirm our commitment to participate in the better coordination of our struggles against colonialism, neocolonialism, and imperialism, with a promise that freedom will result in the welfare and well-being, not only of our continent's peoples, but also the people of Palestine and the world at large. Long live international solidarity, long live.
Yes, long live Comrade Farid. Thank you very much for a very thought-provoking and emotionally provoking speech. I think there's some words of wisdom that one has taken from your presentation. Without much further ado, if is Prof available?
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Prof. Thank you. Can you kindly start with your presentation?
I'm happy to start. First of all, I recognize the Deputy Minister. Thank you very much for being with us. And then there is Ambassador Gilder from Damascus, our ambassador to the Syrian Republic of Damascus. And there are also other comrades. Comrades Bongani Masuku is with us. And of course, I should have, in terms of priorities, I should have mentioned the Deputy President, Comrade Shingange of COSATU earlier, and to all the other comrades who are present. I think Comrade Alvin Botus put it quite correctly, and I'd like to expand on that a bit. The whole idea of our subjectivity. Now, of course, as South Africans, one country on a continent that has survived centuries of colonization, and after our formal colonizations, experienced new forms of recolonizations. If you look at the French interest, for example, in many parts of West Africa, if you look at a number of other countries, French interest there, even French interest here in Reunion, they still carved out areas of special interest or areas of special quote unquote responsibilities. So we've gone through as a country, and as well as a country, we've experienced both colonialism and colonialism of a special type, apartheid, but as a continent, we are the children all of our liberation struggles. And that is a subjectivity that we cannot abandon. It's one thing that our government has been unashamed about, despite calls and quite superficial calls from the Israeli lobby in South Africa, that the government must adopt a balanced approach. It's never something that they will ask France, for example. It's certainly not something that they will ever ask of the United States to adopt a balanced approach. They will never tell the United States, in order to be effective in resolving, quote unquote, this problem, you have to have a balanced approach. In fact, the idea even of the Palestinians asking the United States for a balanced approach is a foolhardy idea. No Palestinian have ever asked the US for a balanced approach. So deep are they in bed with the Israelis, so enmeshed are the political lobbies with US politics and other power brokers, that it's unimaginable that the Palestinians can wish for a balanced approach. But in South Africa, the Israeli lobby has the temerity to ask the people of South Africa for a balanced approach. This is, you know, like a serial woman abuser appealing on behalf of another woman abuser and ask, you know, the world to have a balanced approach to the question of the abuse of women. The abuse of women victimizes women, but the perpetrators in large of the victimization of women, it's men. So you don't reduce gender-based violence to a domestic issue. You know, oh, this couple, they just don't get on with each other. If we can just make them sit down and understand each other, then this man will stop beating his wife. Folks, that's not how it works in real life. You know, in gender-based violence, the whole idea, you know, of many, many parents of women, where they keep on sending the woman back to your married house or to your marriage bed. It doesn't work like that. There is a visible and a clear abuser on the one hand and on the other. So when one talks about bilateral relations or international cooperation and this kind of thing, and I understand that this is a necessity, with due respect to Deputy Minister and to Ambassador Gilder, this is an inherent part of your language. And it has to be, because you are in many ways trying to also find realistic and concrete issues, if not to gain victory over the abuses, to unsettle the abuses, to loosen their grips. And sometimes, you know, in the world of diplomacy, you don't always have the option of doing what is ideal. You have to deal with, you know, you cook your pot of food with the political and economic givens of the day. Of course, I mean, and this is the one thing that's wonderful about our democracy, that and of the ruling party, is that it doesn't only welcome, but it encourages the voices from civil society to speak. And the voices of civil society, on the whole, it is by its nature, it is truer to the memories of our people than what the policies of the ruling party is. Because the ruling party is, for better or for worse, it is constrained. We don't like to talk about these constraints, although we do need more public discussion about it. I mean, when the United States threatened South Africa with the end of the, I think it is the AGOA agreements, if South Africa doesn't lighten up on the question of Israel or on the question of US bases inside Botswana and so on, these screws are tightened behind the scenes. And often civil society has little understanding of this. But nevertheless, this is our DNA, our built-in subjectivity. And at the same time, some of the logic in our subjectivity. So the one is, our subjectivity is vindicated by the kind of society that we are aspiring to build. We have come through a long, difficult period that could have reduced our whole country into a dirty, prolonged racial war. We overcame that. We're struggling to build a non-racial society, a non-sexist society. Our society is a genuinely free one, free for people to take to the streets, free for people to condemn the president, free for people to say whatever they want to about the ruling party. And wrongly, in my opinion, people have also even got the freedom to now criticize the judiciary. So this is not only something that we inherited from the struggle against colonialism. Our freedoms are also ones that the leadership of our movements in the unions, in COSATU, in the SACP, and in the ANC, our leaders have thought through and worked through. Our leaders have provided leadership for the masses. So not only have they led the masses, not only have they taken advice from, but they've also been led by the masses. On the question, for example, of the death penalty, or on the question of the recognition of same-sex marriages, our leadership really provided leadership to the country and said, look, people, no, we can't go along this way. We can't go along this way. This is the morally and politically correct way to go. So our leadership have been at variance sometimes with the majority of our people in a largely progressive direction, and we're deeply grateful for that. The continent of Africa, as far as political liberation goes, we have the unfinished business, of course, of the Sahrawi republics.
Prof, I think we're struggling to hear.
Oh, are you struggling to hear me? Are you still having difficulty hearing me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
No, we're fine. We find the prof. Proceed. Maybe it's the chairperson that side.
Okay, chairperson, are you still having difficulty hearing me?
No, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay.
I can hear you very well.
Okay, so I'll continue, chairperson. You can indicate again if there's a difficulty. Is that okay? Right.
That's perfect with me. Carry on, Prof. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we do have remnants of colonialism in a bad shape. We still have some islands on the side of Reunion that is colonized by the French. And of course, we have the major issue, the Sahrawi Republic, in which, let's be upfront, comrades, our own mother party has not always acted with diligence. You will recall that on the eve of the previous elective conference at Nasrec, when all of us were busy in ANC policy matters and electoral matters and so on, there was a side note that was suddenly from, we know where it came from, to recognize or to establish diplomatic relations with the Kingdom of Morocco, which is the occupying power in the Sahrawi. And until now, there has been no serious discussion in where that decision came from. To the best of my knowledge, it even eluded people in Durko. And so in foreign policy matters, when the country, so one of the challenges that the continent is facing is the fact that not only is Israel offering these economic projects and moving its diplomatic thrust on the basis of these economic development promises and so on to the continents, but we should not underestimate the fact that dirty money also passes under the tables. The Israeli regime is not immune to passing dirty money on to corrupt leaders in order to effect its own. But the truth is, as Comrade Botes pointed out, we have lost a couple of other African countries, at least their leaderships, and the shock, and the disgust that had happened when the embassy was transferred to Jerusalem. And I, quite frankly, Comrade Reneva, Comrade Fourie spoke about an appeal to the Biden administration to move the embassy back, the US embassy back to Tel Aviv. I don't even know if the kind of pressure that the Israeli lobby had put on those African states, if that will be lifted. We do know under the Biden administration that we won't see that level of pressure that we saw under the Trump regime. So, comrades, in many cases, I mean, one of the questions, that a comrade from Kenya shared on the list is the question of these countries, and what do we do about these countries that refuse to break off relations with Israel. I do think that civil society organizations in the rest of the continent must be strengthened. Africa for Palestine, we've been working with a number of neighboring countries as far afield as Kenya. But two things that we do need to bear in mind. The one is, unlike, and this is very important for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, often the logic of the ANC is identical to the logic of our own liberation struggle. And in our own liberation struggle, there was a very close cooperation between the South African liberation forces and the frontline states. And we recognized the frontline states. They consulted with us whenever they were bombed and so on. We sympathized with them. We backed off from demanding the same level of solidarity from them than what we had before the invasion, say, of Zimbabwe or Namibia. But we knew that with the exception of Malawi, these countries, their governments, their state successive governments, were always, they had our backs. And this is not, so we can't use the logic of diplomacy must move in line with what the neighboring countries want and desire. The voices of the neighboring countries are being repressed by their monarchs, by their military, by their generals and so on. So we don't have the concept of frontline states. And so the Palestinians, in many ways, are really alone. And this then puts a double responsibility on a country like South Africa, who comes from both our ethical genes, our ethical moral genes that we infused into our vision for a new South Africa, and our liberation struggle background, and our history as a continent, to remain true to that, taking in mind the shifts and so on in political terrains and so on. Our compass is an eternal identification with the marginalized, the oppressed, and the colonized. Long live international solidarity, long live.
Long live.
Long live, Prof. Thank you very much again. Wow. I must say, for thought-provoking analogy, the analogy that you made with regard to the different phases of oppression, and also on how to approach it. It's a very awesome analogy. And there's some also thought-provoking questions that you put across there. Thank you again. I think if we can just also then move on to our next speaker, Comrade Rajan from Kenya for Palestine. Are you there?
I'm ready.
Yes, he is.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I hand over the platform to you?
Thank you. I would first like to bring warm greetings and solidarity from Kenya and from the comrades in Kenya. We face a very different situation, but I'd just like to, first of all, congratulate South Africa for the sterling leadership role that it has provided in the solidarity to the Palestine people. And really, it is it's an exception on the South African continent, but it also has the honors of providing leadership on the African continent in terms of solidarity Palestine. We in Kenya face a very different scene altogether. We don't have a government or a party that really provides solidarity and has real sympathy for the Palestinian people. We are a largely Christian country, almost 80% Christian, and that makes our work that much harder. The Palestinian struggle is regarded as being largely a Muslim struggle. And I think it's something that we battle with all the time in terms of saying that the Palestinian struggle is a human rights struggle. It's on those bases that we want to connect and be in solidarity with Palestine. We obviously have a lot of propaganda from Israel, which is very strong in Kenya in terms of its Zionist presence. It's always had a very strong presence, and like you know, we've had various atrocities on the African continent. In East Africa, we've had the raid on the Entebbe airport, where Kenya provided logistical support into Israel invading Uganda during that particular incident. And so and the government of Kenya sort of ambiguous role. They've just, I think, over the last 2 or 3 years, we finally have a Palestinian embassy here. But by and large, it's been it's all its policies are generally pro-Zionist, and it has provided one of the strongest bulwarks for Israel and Zionism in East Africa and in Kenya in particular. We've had a new constitution since 2010, which allows the right to protest, the right to associate, the right to be on the streets, but we've had a complete clampdown in terms of any public protest that we wanted to organize in terms of providing solidarity for Palestine. However, during this crisis, we tried a couple of times and groups got dispersed, but we did have from the city of Mombasa, we had the youth came out spontaneously and had various marches and right through the city, cars and picky-pickies and things. So that was very encouraging. So we operate in a scenario where we've got a sort of a semblance that we support the Palestinian struggle, but really the security sector, which is dominated by Palestine, particularly in terms of supply of arms, makes it very difficult for us to operate in as far as civil society rights are concerned. In Kenya, we really started in terms of building a solidarity alliance with Palestine in 2011. We're a very small group of people, but completely angered by the constant attacks and the brutality which has befallen the Palestinian people. We were absolutely adamant and determined to make sure that the Palestinian struggle was firmly rooted in the minds of Kenyans. Our main platform is basically to have education and information. There's a lot of propaganda because the mainstream press is completely in the pockets of Israel and imperialism as such, and it becomes extremely difficult for us to penetrate mainstream press to talk about Palestine. But in our small way, and with the advent of social media, it has made life so much more easier for us to exemplify and to amplify the voice of the Palestinian people in Kenya. I just want to talk about what Comrade Farid talked about in terms of having balanced discussions. It's one of the problems we faced when we had a film festival at the Alliance Francaise in Nairobi. And when I first approached them that I wanted that we wanted a film festival at the Alliance, we were straight away told no, and I asked why, and he says, well, we have very strong relations with Israel, and we have a festival, so it'll be difficult for you. So I said, look, you already taken sides, and we demand our place that if you're speaking to Israel, that is your prerogative, but we also demand that we have space to have the voice of Palestinians. They finally agreed, and we had the really faced was after films when we had discussion panels. I personally was pressured by the administration to say, please do not, your discussions must be balanced, and you must not have politics. And we laughed our faces at them, say, how can you talk about Palestine and Israel without being political? But that was like our last engagement with them, and then since then we have stopped engaging with them and used other platforms to amplify our solidarity with Palestine. Our youth in the informal settlements, they've been great supporters in terms of hosting events and bringing people together to talk about and debate about the Palestinian issue. We also we have support from some sectors of the human rights community. Some NGOs are extremely good, and the Muslim community in various ways in terms of radio stations and community halls and things have hosted our Palestinian events. 2 years ago in 2019, we had Ramzi Baroud, who made a week's tour of Nairobi. We couldn't take him to other parts of Kenya due to funds and logistical problems. But that provided a very good basis in which we again managed to now capture media in terms of there are now various new radio and TV stations which came up, and we managed to host discussions and films as well in terms of bringing more awareness of what the Palestinian struggle is all about. So over the last 6 months or 1 year, we've managed, despite the pandemic, and that's been a very difficult situation, we managed again to regroup as a small thing, and we've started various initiatives in terms of the struggle. One of the things that we've started is to start amplifying and organizing around the BDS campaign, and Kenyans for Palestine, of which we are part of the Kenya-Palestine Solidarity Movement. We've just released a leaflet which people can download for free, print, and distribute among the communities. And about a week ago, we've put food from Israel, and we put pressure on them, and they actually have now made very clear that they have stopped buying from this particular outlet of Israel called Baraka Israel. They supply wines and foods and things, and they're now buying from Egypt and other countries. So that's good in the sense that we've had some breakthrough, and the BDS campaign is slowly but surely taking shape. One of the things that we are very keen on in terms of is building a Pan-African alliance. We feel that we really need to support countries on the African continent that are just beginning and do not have full infrastructure, but have individuals and small groups that are in solidarity with Palestine. So in that vein, I would just like to correct that Kenya did not move its embassy to Jerusalem. It did abstain from the vote at the UN, but Kenya maintains its sort of cordial relations with both Palestine and Israel. So we did not move to Jerusalem. So I'd like to correct that impression. We have over the last few years established, and we have now various links. Obviously, South Africa, we've got links with South Africa, but we've also started building alliances in Tanzania. Malawi just announced its first solidarity movement last week. And we've got links with Mauritius, Nigeria, Ghana, and Cameroon. And we are hoping to sort of be able to lead and to work with other African countries in building a Pan-African solidarity movement. But I must say that despite all the violence and the gloom of the attacks on Palestine from the 10th to the 21st, it has dialectically brought out the energy and the interest of the Kenyan people in terms of providing solidarity, and out of many just different strengths, people have spontaneously come out and organized events and run social media campaigns. And Mombasa in particular has been very encouraging. So they have a small group in Mombasa as well. So it's great that after maybe between 5 or 10 years of operation, we finally got the Kenyan people, and particularly the youth, being able to own and to take and to voice solidarity for Palestine here in Kenya. I think that sort of rhymes with what the Palestinian youth themselves have done, that in this last crisis, what the Palestinian youth have shown is that they've basically ignored all the mainstream parties and things. They realize that these parties and the struggles that go on doesn't help. And I think at least in our view, we think that the parties have become, have become irrelevant, that the youth themselves have now taken the mantle and are forming themselves into their own independent movements. And I think that is very, very good and very encouraging, that the Palestinian people are going to get away from sectarian politics and basically build a national movement for Palestine. Finally, just to say that in terms of this two-state solution, which country in the world has agreed to have a two-state solutions? Countries want independence, they want to break away from colonialism, neocolonialism, and Zionism. So there's absolutely no basis for even talking about the two-state solution. We need a unified Palestine. Viva Palestine, viva Palestine. Thank you very much, and thank you to South Africa for leading the way in Palestine solidarity.
Yes, thank you very much, Comrade Rajan, for that very emotive and thought-provoking presentation again. Really, thank you for also highlighting the fact that the youth is also being more proactive and wanting to take action and making the people accountable for their actions. Without further ado, I'd like to perhaps open just a short Q&A, because I see there's some very pertinent questions being asked. If I can just get assistance with the number of hands that have been put up. It's for now, on our side, it's 15:26. If I can ask for maybe maximum 10 minutes after this, just for a quick Q&A, we'll only have one round of questions. Can I ask Comrade Zanele just to assist me in asking questions from this current platform online, and then maybe one or two other questions from Facebook?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm only seeing one question on the chat line. Solidarity movement. The question for other African countries maintaining any relations with apartheid Israel regime despite its violation of all international laws, including those they see as legitimizing their genocidal regime. How does this webinar propose that we in the Solidarity with Palestine movement should proceed with this question? And then on Facebook, the only things, what's on Facebook is just comments. There's no questions on Facebook that I'm picking up. It's just comments that are supporting this event. So, and I only see Professor Farid's hand on the app. I suppose he would want to maybe respond to this question. But the only question is one. There's no other question. Thank you. Unless people who are in attendance would like to ask from the floor.
Comrade Zanele, if I may step in, I am happy to respond to that question, but I really raised my hand on a question of protocol.
Okay.
While I did, clearly, I engendered my approach to the question of Palestine. I used the analogy of the abuse of women and so on, so I am kind of gender sensitive. And at the same time, I made a bit of a blunder by not acknowledging you, Comrade Zanele, and not acknowledging Comrade Sonia, who's also here. And then of course, there was also the chairperson, Comrade Schlahane, who I didn't acknowledge. So I just want to acknowledge your presence and my respect. We do have hierarchies in the movement, and they generally, I think, they serve us well. So I just want to be kind of obedient to my level of where I am in my organizational structures. Okay, but if I can then quickly, while I'm at it, other comrades can also respond to this question. Look, in many ways, comrades, it's understandable that countries are governed largely by their national interest. And so when countries retain relationships, I'm talking about most countries, okay? It's understandable that they maintain what is in our national interest. In South Africa, of course, we have a bigger understanding of what our national interest is. And our national interest is, and part of our national interest is international solidarity, it is progressive internationalism, it is commitment to the country, it is commitment to the spirit of Ubuntu. We've incorporated that and we are really fortunate. The tragedy about other countries is when in the name of national interest, it is oligarchies and lobbies, really. I mean, the story that I hear from the comrade in Kenya, this is typical of the story that we hear from other neighboring countries. It is oligarchies and it is big businesses and it is politically tainted money that changes hands, and then it masquerades as the national interest. So in some cases, I want to say we need to be careful in how we deal with many governments. Some of many countries on the continent, they're also very poor, they're desperate and so on. Fortunately, things are changing on the continent with the larger geopolitical dynamics changing, the weakening of the United States in general, the rise of China and so on. And there are other concerns that, that we also have then that emerge from that. So, so my position is, in the case of a democratically elected government that allows all of these freedoms, we have the responsibility to keep on pushing. And at the same time, at the back of our heads, especially, I mean, somebody like myself, you know, I'm an academic, I'm also I'm a comrade in the movement. I can't just spit on my government, because I have an understanding of the limitations that my government faces. So publicly, I can make demands and I must make demands, and we must push for the full implementation of ANC resolutions. And this goes for putting pressure on other African countries also. But when it comes to South Africa putting pressures on other countries, we also have to be careful, because we are the largest economy on the continent. And if we're going to be overplaying our hand, it could cause a lot of resentment. And it could even lead to, in the long run, to the reality of South Africa as an imperial state in relation to other countries. So it's a tough call, you know, to take those other African countries who are selling out, to take them to task on the one hand, and not to act with either financial or political bullying on the part of South Africa. We have to struggle all the time to take the rest of the continent with us. Sometimes we move ahead of the continent, like in our own constitution. I mentioned the different examples where our party went ahead of our people, but we also have to keep on going and checking on the pulse of our people to ensure that they're with us. And this applies to the other countries on the continent as well.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your response, for answering the question. Is there any other follow-up?
There are no hands, Chair.
Okay. I'm just seeing, is this a question on the chat platform?
Yes,
or
there
can
is.
I continue? Okay,
Yes,
I
it's a
think,
question.
okay, I think we can maybe perhaps entertain this one and let this be the last question before we close. Is that fine with everyone, so that we should be done in about 5 minutes? Is that okay?
That's okay.
Comrade Reneva can go, I think, or Comrade, I don't think it's really a question for the Comrade Deputy Minister. We should spare him the embarrassment of having to answer that.
Okay, so the question is, given the limitation of the weapon of government, shouldn't we develop a sharpen the weapon of people's power? Maybe a direct action is the question.
I would prefer that Comrade Farid responds because my network here is very unstable. My apologies for that.
Yeah, Comrade Reneva, that was a very diplomatic answer, or a partner to a diplomatic answer. Anyway, I think that, I mean, well, it depends on what the comrade from Kenya, it's a comrade from Kenya, I think another comrade from Kenya, what he means by direct action. I mean, in Britain last year, we had what I thought was a wonderful display of direct action when many of these activists went onto the roof of this arms company and poured red blood over the building. But the comrade from Kenya has just these things directly. It is the question of BDS as one example. Of course, I think even Comrade Botus had referred to it, although in a slightly diplomatically nuanced way. Comrade Reneva had responded to it. I think that all of us support the option of the boycott of the Israeli state, sanctions, disinvestment from Israel, and sanctions. There are some things that says from the occupied territories. And I think on that we may differ. Some of us would prefer to, including Africa for Palestine, to boycott all Israeli products. But again, there is only 24 hours in a day, and so it is best sometimes to focus on a particular item or a few particular items, or to delineate and speak about the occupied territories. But the BDS option is the most viable option. It is having increasing impact. It is a non-violent object, not that I'm going to sit in judgment on anybody who chooses other objects. I mean, I am not there. I'm not going to be condemning or people. I mean, so we, from our angle here, we support direct action. I mean, by going to pushing our government, pushing companies that deal with Israel, and insisting and pushing for an international boycott of Israel. So yes, that is a form of direct action, but many comrades in other parts of the world can develop their own things also. I mean, there aren't real international exact guidelines. The Boycott National Coalition, based in Ramallah, there are guidelines, and this is certainly a cause that we need to popularize more often.
Okay, Chair, there was a hand, Comrade Bongani's hand was up. I don't know if you want to take your hand.
I think we've got about 2 minutes left before we can round off. So, okay, we'll entertain. Yes, Comrade Bongani, a question.
Oh, thank you very much, Comrade Chair. Thanks to conveners. All protocol observed. Thanks for the comrades who have participated and made good presentation. Just one point. Particularly because the Kenyan comrade indicated about it. I think we must also strengthen the networks that are existing in Africa. I do know that in Kenya, there were dock workers, particularly in Mombasa, who used to be very active on some of the debates. We met with some of them in Senegal, because Senegal is a very strong movement on Palestine. So in solidarity with Palestine. So they were part of the debates we had there. So we must identify each country in Africa where there is a growing movement and be able to link up. And in particular, dock workers are critical in refusing to handle goods to and from Israel. And I think we must sustain that. It must not be a once-off, not only in South Africa, all the countries that have got coasts. It's very important so that we identify pressure points that can be practical, that can be able to have impact. And then we identify all the companies that we must transmit to the whole continent for them to know that these companies are apartheid supporting and racist institution. So we can be able to identify practical immediate steps. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Comrade Bongani. I think you also alluded to my closing statement here. When I'm reminded of an African proverb when they say, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, we go together. So it's very pertinent that we are moving, creating a movement on the continent, with others being a little bit ahead of each other, but at least we are moving together. And just of note is that COSATU is also looking into a consumer boycott campaign, but as its progress in the making, so due date will be announced as soon as possible. I just wanted to perhaps share a video to show that I'm a frontline worker. So when it comes to seeing the other side of the bombings and the scourge of attacks that is put on the Palestinians, one is seeing it firsthand. So I can relate to the mothers and the grandmothers out there who have their little ones or their families hurt. So yeah, this is just from my side. If there's nothing else, Comrade Zanele, then I think we can then close the session.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to all the speakers and the attendants.
Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and happy Africa Day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, COSATU.
Amandla Uhuru for Africa.
Thanks, COSATU. Thanks, SACP. Thanks, ANC. Viva.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Ciao.
Okay, ciao, ciao.
Happy Africa Day.